Hi and welcome to Teach Start, and in today's video what we're looking at is being a memorable teacher. And that doesn't mean that, when people leave school they remember you. No, it means in your lessons you need to be thinking about retention of memory. Not just short-term memory but long-term, because we're in the position we're in not to be affecting people's short-term memory. That's not interesting. Can you remember these numbers in 5 seconds time? Well done. But that's not going to help them with life or the exam or anything else. So we're all about long-term memory. Now, how do you affect their long-term memory? If we had a perfect answer to that, then there will be like a teacher Bible written out that everyone would follow. Right, this is how to affect their long-term memory. The difficulty in writing that, this is how to do it kind of book is, A, no one knows, no one even remotely knows. Like, the research into this is in so many different areas and so many different fields and so many different results that it's very, very early stages, I would say. And the second thing is really that every student is different, every teacher is different. There's so many what we call extraneous variables that it's impossible to say one size fits all, this is how to do it. And that's why as teachers we have so much freedom, because your job is not to follow the way. Your job is to react with how your students are remembering things. If you teach them a lesson and the next lesson they have no idea what you taught them the previous lesson, and that has happened to me before and it is soul destroying, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but it's our job not to never have that happen. That happens to everyone, but to react to it and go, right, this ain't a class that is going to learn that way. I've got to shift the way I'm teaching them. Now, on that lesson, I'm kind of thinking of one that I've taught, and I'm thinking of one I've observed as well. They were amazing lessons. Mine and this teacher's lessons were incredible. The teacher I observed actually was a science teacher, talking about acids and talking about different things, and it was so interactive, and they did experiment, and then there was a kind of animation that he showed them, and it was really, really good lesson. But I asked the students at the end, so talk to me about X, and they did not have a clue. And I actually popped in the next lesson, not for very long, but I asked the students, even the most basic things about that lesson, and they did not have a clue. And it was so unfortunate, because the teacher had presented such a perfect lesson, but they just hadn't learnt anything. And that's a really big problem as a teacher, when your students are not learning anything. So how do you sort that out? How do you figure that out as a teacher? Because we're not going to get very far as teachers if they're not learning anything with us. Well, first of all, you've got to find out whether they are learning stuff for you. You have to be testing them or asking them questions on previous lessons very, very soon after. Every long-term memory has a short life, like a half-life even. It degrades over time, obviously, we know that, right? The less they use it as well, the more it degrades. So if they never have heard, if you do a topic with you and then you never refer to it again, then it degrades quite quickly, quite surprisingly actually, and you end up with 10% of it after 6 months or whatever. Like, there's all these figures and you can research them. How do you do it then? Like, how do you cope with that if you find out they're not learning anything? Well, the most common mistake, I think, in my experience, is teachers trying to teach too much and being way too ambitious with their lesson about what the majority of students are able to learn in that lesson. And yes, you've got to differentiate, and you've got to have, maybe some groups of students understanding and learning more stuff and more skills than some students, and that's normal. But I've seen lessons that are just packed full of just everything. And I like, when I'm observing, I'm very conscious of the fact that people obviously want to impress the observer and want to show challenge, especially if the school is all about challenging the students. But I would say, in those lessons, that if they did a third of what they were trying to do in that lesson, it would have been an outstanding lesson. It would have been absolutely successful, and I would have been leaving that room happy. So as a teacher, don't try and overdo it. The second thing I would say is there's something in memory called blocking and chunking, I think it's normally called. So what chunking is as humans, we can only remember a certain amount of things. I think it's called Miller's number, 7 plus or minus 2. That's we find that easy to remember. Anything more than that, we're not going to remember. So instead of trying to learn, instead of trying to learn 20 things, try and think of like ways of pairing them up and grouping them together into a smaller amount of things. And that's really, really useful for some such circumstances. Creating a story that links everything together, and so in your memory, if you're thinking that one, you go, oh yeah, but then the next one's that one, and creating a story involving them can help. Although I think that unless it's rehearsed, unless next lesson you repeat the story, and the lesson after you repeat the story, it's not as effective. Rhymes work really well. So something I got from a colleague to help this teacher was a rhyme, and it was let me try and remember. Mary had a little lamb that little lambs no more, for what she thought was H2O was H2SO4. Now, if you understand anything about chemistry, which I don't know too much about chemistry, but that's a way of remembering, I think it's sulfuric acid, which is H2SO4. And the theory was that they just recite that at the start of each lesson, and they've got the chemical equation or the chemical formula for water, H2O, which most of them should know anyway, but some of them maybe didn't. But they've also got H2SO4, which is sulfuric acid, which is something that was a requirement for the exam, that they understood what the chemical formula for sulfuric acid was. And it's fun, and you remember it because it's funny. And what's it? The Colours of the Rainbow, Richard of York gave battle in vain, I think is one, but there's probably loads of others. There's so many rhymes I can remember. And acronyms as well work really well. So if you do an essay-based one, there's so many acronyms for the points you need to raise that I can't even remember one, but I've heard loads and loads and loads of ways of remembering. Right, we've got to analyze, explore, and all this stuff, and it spells out a word, and then you just say to them that word, and it helps them remember the process. If you said to them, right, this is what I want you to do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, got that? Right, get on with it. They're not going to remember it. But if you do if you make it spell out a word, or spell out not even a word but something silly, then they're likely to remember it. So I think instead of planning lessons by focusing on the content you want to do and focusing on the pictures you're going to have in your PowerPoint and the way you're going to present it, try and figure out if there's something you can make something silly for, and a kind of different way, something memorable. And I've given examples before where I've just been really, really silly, or made a silly joke, or perhaps done a bit of a lesson in a different way that's kind of caught them off guard, and they remember that. If you make a memorable experience, they'll remember the content that's around that experience. And yeah, there's loads and loads of different examples, and maybe in future videos I'll go through kind of other examples of how to make key points of your lesson memorable. But I hope this has been helpful, and if you've got anything you've found really helpful in getting students to remember stuff, please write them in the comments below. Thank you. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you want to see more from us, please click subscribe. We release videos every single weekday at 5 o'clock in the evening. Thank you.